Welcome, pilots. My name is Hybrid V, and today I wanted to talk about Star Citizen and the new heat management systems that are included in the 3.5 patch. Now, this has been recorded in 3.5 while it's still in PTU, so what's in here might be changing, any of the values or what I'm talking about might change, but the overall mechanics and underlying ideas behind it are going to be relatively the same. And I wanted to take some time to go ahead and explain how these systems work. And then at the end, I'll probably throw in a little bit of my own opinion based on that current system and then where we can go from there. All right, so let's go ahead and dive in. All right, so I'm here in my Arrow, and I have my heat management system here. You can tell at the bottom here, these are all the systems that heat is generating, power output, all that. And then it's all located down here. Over here on my right, this is actually my thrusters. So this is the same heat management app, and here's the thruster out there. I'm going to go ahead and spool up. I'm going to try to do a picture-in-picture so you guys can see that a little bit better. There we go. And let's go ahead and boost up. So you can see that heat is generating a little bit because we are going slightly over the normal idle output. So heat is slowly rising. Gonna go ahead and back off now since we hit cruise, and I don't want to hit the other side of the barrier, so I'm gonna go ahead and brake. Let's turn around, engage main thrusters, afterburn, and stopped. There you go. You can see the temperature outputs were pretty high, mainly because I was trying to stop, but it wasn't too bad when I was going in a straight line. And let that cool off real quick. So over here you can see as I throttle forward, I go above idle output and I start to create a little bit of heat. Let's go ahead and do some maneuvers here. I'm going to try to keep this in shot. I know the camera moves around a lot in the Arrow. So you can see as I'm trying to maneuver around this rock here, keeping it in targeted in focus, the heat generation is kind of evened out among different types of thrusters there. I'm not entirely using my main thrusters. So in theory, I could push my craft in a certain direction long enough and hard enough and just completely kill out those thrusters on that system. So for example, the vertical thrusters on the top or the maneuvering thrusters that are at the bottom of the craft. These are things that you have to keep in mind when you're trying to do much more intricate maneuvers. Let's use some afterburning now. And you can see the afterburning actually really pushes it into the red zone. You don't hear it as often as I'm hitting it here, but I am activating. You can tell I'm activating because you can see the red down there at the bottom right. Every time it's on, that means that that particular thruster is getting an extra boost in power, almost like overclocking, I guess you could say. And as I push those, I'm generating a lot more heat. And there you go, I got the overheat warning, which always happens at 800 degrees. Whereas when it reaches 1,000, like I just did there, it will kill that particular thruster. In this case, it was my main thruster. So once I hit 1,000, it kills it. Alright, let's go ahead. I'm going to boost forward here real quick. Let's do some afterburner. There we go, generating a lot of heat. 800, and then boom, dead after 1,000. Afterburner kills the engines incredibly fast, so you have to be very careful. Do some maneuvering around the center satellite column here, whatever this thing is, space station thing. Using AB and normal thrust maneuver, I'm going to try to keep myself stable, but every time I use AB, I'm going to pull a lot of heat here. So this is where you have to really think about your maneuvers ahead of time. Kind of like when they do energy management in dogfighting. You'll need to manage where your ship's going, understand like if I pull this maneuver, am I going to overshoot? Or in this case right here, I decided to AB, and now I have a dead engine, I have to wait for it to spool back up. There we go. Let that cool real quick. So in some ways you'll have to be, depending on your situation, very conservative with your throttle management and how you use AB and whatnot. You can't just use it all the time. Well, you can now, because engines have basically unlimited durability, but when in 3.6 with durability patch coming in, not going to be able to do this very long. We're going to kill those thrusters. All right, so I decided to load up the Aegis Saber. This is just a stock Saber loadout with stealth parts that come with it. So on the left, I got my heat. Over here on the right, here's my thruster output. Again, with the heat. I'm going to try to also do picture-in-picture so you guys can see this a little bit better. Just keep an eye on the right there to the temperature gauge. And then, of course, on the left over there is the other heat manager. So let's line this up here. And let's jettison and take a look at those numbers. Pretty good so far. Not a whole lot of heat being generated. There's some heat being generated, but not really a whole lot. I mean, it's just pushing the mass of the ship through 0G, so it's not too bad. Kill it. I think I should be able to stop it in time. Let's hope so. Let's pull after. Okay, I think I did this a little late. Uh-oh. Oh no, I did it a little late. Okay, back in the saddle here. If anything, that's a good indicator of how different the Arrow is in comparison to, say, the Saber, where the Saber is quite a heavier craft. All right, setup's all same here. I'm going to go ahead and jump off, and let's take a look at that heat. I'm going to do AB this time. Look how quickly that thing overheats. Woo. I have to pull off a little bit halfway through. Let it cool off. This other thing too, I'm flying the Saber stock, so you notice there I got the low power warning. The stealth systems do not actually do very well in both cooling and power generation, but it's supposed to be better for stealth, which is not really a thing right now. So a ship like this, it's probably not a good idea to run nothing but stealth parts. But anyway, I'm going to do some maneuvers. I'm just curious as to how the ship handles, and let's take a look at the heat generation. Again, unfortunately, this MFD only shows 4 components at a time, so I can't exactly show you all the other thrusters that are going to be overheating here. So anything that's overheating, you might not be able to see it. Let's try to keep this nice and smooth. So you see, I'm basically managing not just throttle, but also afterburn speed. So I usually use afterburn just to quickly change direction. So if I don't want to overshoot too much, I can do something like that right there, AB, and you can see that little circle in the center of the screen. If you're not familiar with it, a lot of pilots call it the meatball. That is actually showing the direction that the craft is actually moving in. So as long as I can keep an eye on where that is, I know exactly where my ship is going to end up. So in this case, it's not in front of me, so I'm going to use AB. There it goes, and it brings it into line. Lets me know that it is coming up in front of me now. Pulling a little hard. And I'm able to stay and do these maneuvers here for a good while, despite the fact that these are stealth parts. I haven't really overheated too much yet here. Just got a message. Nope, that wasn't you. If you're on Spectrum right now, that wasn't you getting a message. That was me getting a message. All right, so let's see here. Let me push this a little bit harder here. There we go. Push it a little bit harder, just a little bit too long. So in a way, it kind of reminds me of G-locking, where you have to really ride that edge, and heat management is the same thing too. You have to really ride the edge of heat management. It's a little bit tricky because we don't always pay attention to the heat output of our craft. And from what I can see, what they're adding in this whole system is it seems to be just another level of skill that has to be involved. There's a lot of throttle management and control that's required for flying the craft. Okay, so now we are in the Gladius here, and we are at ArcCorp because I want to show off some atmospheric flight. Let me turn on the ship. And we're going to see the difference between atmospheric flight compared to what we saw at Arena Commander, which was 0G. Let me just set up my MFDs real quick. Okay, so we're all set up here and good to go. Let's go ahead and gear up. And here we are in ArcCorp in the daytime. Go ahead and get ourselves a little bit more altitude here. Alright, cool. Ready to go, except ATC annoyingly changed my MFD. Switch that back. There we go. Here's my thruster outputs. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and let's give some throttle and keep it at the regular SCM recommended speeds. So the limiter right now is set to the recommended speeds. And you should notice down there a little bit, let me do a little bit of maneuvering here, that the heat is relatively controlled. Like it's actually staying at relatively idle heat generation. So I'm not having to worry about it too much. Let me zoom in so you guys can see that here. Let's see, it's fine. That thruster, there it is. Main left and right. A little bit of maneuvering here. Give it a little bit of a pull here. Let's do a loop. So even under normal SCM, even if I pull hard, it's going to generate some heat pulling hard, but not too bad. You can see as I pull the stick, I'm probably going to might over G a little bit doing this a couple times, but you can see that it's definitely outputting a lot more as it tries to control the craft. But it's not generating a whole lot of heat. So it's quite manageable. If I open up the throttle here, and now I'm going over recommended speed, I'm generating normal heat now. Pull really hard on the stick here. See that heat generation. It's still relatively manageable as long as I'm not opening it for too long. And let it cool a little bit. Go ahead and boost. So the numbers are fairly consistent. Nothing too crazy. It's when I decide to go above SCM and attempt to go into cruise mode is when you're going to see some interesting changes. So now I have opened my throttle. I'm in cruise control. I have the throttle set to unlimited, and now the ship is attempting to reach cruise mode. And what's happening here is you can see that because it's attempting to reach cruise mode, but it's not achieving cruise mode, it is constantly fighting atmospheric drag. So you'll notice there on the MFD panel that I am above idle throttle, or above idle power I should say, and I am slowly generating heat. If I maintain this rate of speed and this rate of throttle, I will eventually cook the engines and they will emergency shut down. So the purpose of this is essentially a little bit of a limit to it. So for example, on the top right of my HUD there is the max save speed MSS, and I am at or around or just below max save speed. Again, this is how much the craft can actually manage to pull itself through atmosphere at its highest power output. And unfortunately, at its highest power output in Star Citizen, in this current build, it does generate a lot of heat, which means I can go pretty darn fast through atmosphere, but at the risk of overheating my thruster components. So this is something to consider if you were fighting, for example, in atmosphere. You might want to consider that, well, I'm going to get more speed, but I'm also going to be generating a lot of heat in the process. It kind of reminds me in a way of war emergency power on radial craft from back in the day, where they used to have the ability to do either like, there's the overheat warning at 100 degrees, at 1,000 will shut down. But it reminds me of like water injection systems, ethanol injections, anything that was designed to generate more power for the engine. And it was called war emergency power because it was meant to be used in emergencies. For example, if you were in a dogfight and you needed that extra boost of speed to either gain energy or gain the advantage over your opponent. But the problem is if you ran war emergency power for too long, you risk damaging the actual engine itself or overheating it and just killing it outright. And it's kind of the same idea here. I'm not sure it's exactly the same concept. We're not exactly injecting anything other than just, opening the throttle more. But we're essentially fighting. Oh, there goes the engines. Hit 1,000. We're dead in the water now. Wait for it to reset. But essentially, we are fighting atmospheric drag. So this is what's definitely killing the engines a lot more. This is why, as I dial it back to recommended speeds, you'll notice the engines will cool and set at a comfortable 300 degrees. Unless I do maneuvers, of course. But for the most part, it will stay in this comfortable range. So this is kind of more of the throttle range that is expected for typical transit. Obviously, like a lot of us, we're very interested in getting through here, getting through these different zones and stuff as fast as possible, which, I mean, it serves its purpose now, but when heat, or I should say component degradation, comes in the next patch with 3.6, where components are regularly going to be degrading based on its performance and how much we're pushing it. This is something that you probably would be doing more often than not. Otherwise, you're going to constantly have to keep replacing components. Let's do some maneuvers with the throttle open. Some AB. You can see that temp rising up. So this is very important to keep in mind of because, again, like I said, right now, you can actually even see on the MFDs, hopefully I have it zoomed in for you right now, but essentially you can see the health of the actual component on there. It's the left of the actual temperature. I'm over temping almost G-lock there. And that health component is actually the wear of the actual component. So for example, if I was doing this in 3.6 and I was constantly running these engines hot, the wear of that component would go down significantly over time. So if I open it up here and I start to generate that heat again, I should generally be okay. It's when I overheat the engines I think we'll start to see component degradation really be bad. And that's pretty much like when you hit AB afterburner and it turns red there. That also will probably contribute a lot to the wear. So in essence, there's a lot of balancing that needs to go into how you fly your craft. So you could open throttle like this as much as you want, get to your destination as quickly as you want, but the problem is that you'll eventually really kill the engines due to heat degradation. Now, hopefully I have explained adequately enough how these systems are currently working in this current iteration of Star Citizen, which I believe as of recording is the R patch in the PTU. Again, like I said, this whole system could be different by the time you're watching this video, but the mechanics should roughly be the same. So what does this mean in my opinion? And I'm also curious to hear your guys' opinion of this in the comment section below. So in my opinion, currently right now with the current system in 3.5 patch R PTU, heat is a little bit, it's a little unforgiving in a certain sense. So for example, right now the best fighters, primarily in PvP, are the light fighters, whether it's the Gladius or the Arrow or even the Hawk. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The only reason why I personally don't like that they are the only fighters that everybody's picking right now is it lends less to variety. So if a Saber and a Super Hornet are having a hard time keeping up with these ships, not necessarily because of their rotation or their maneuverability, but because their heat management is so much worse because they're much heavier craft, then there is literally no reason to want to fly something like a Saber or a Super Hornet. Simply because why would you need to if you can just slap assisted gimbals on an Arrow and call it a day and just completely clean house? So that's why in my opinion the system is a little bit unforgiving and it needs to be dialed back a little bit to a point where we really can get in there and still have that level of nuance that we're looking for in the system, but still also be forgiving to newer players as well as experienced players. I should be able to fly in 0G and AB for a relatively decent amount of time. I don't have any numbers to give right now because this is entirely based on my feeling of the current system and having put some time into dogfighting. And my feelings are that this system needs to be extended just a little bit more than what it is now. So cooling should be a little bit more efficient. Because right now, like I said, if you want to pull some crazy maneuvers, especially if you're going against another light fighter, it is very tough. It is very difficult to the point where it is more of a hassle than it is fun. As for atmospheric flight, I haven't tested it in PvP too much. I've only flown it, you know, as what you're seeing now, essentially, where I am just flying around and enjoying it and trying maneuvers out. So I don't really have too much of an opinion on that yet. But as from what I see so far, it seems relatively okay. It's where you try to dogfight in 0G, you start to run into issues with the light fighters and the heavier fighters and stuff like that. But those are just some of my opinions. But in regards to Star Citizen, This is the current iteration of heat management in 3.5. I hope this video was educational and helping you understand how heat is currently working in Star Citizen, and maybe give you a little bit of insight on how to control your craft a little bit better, especially in a dogfight or even an atmospheric flight. If you have any other questions, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the verse.